What's up, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Falcons Final Whistle podcast presented by Zaxby's. For the first time during the 2023 regular season, we come to you bearing bad news if you're a Falcons fan. Atlanta lost a tough one up in Detroit. 20-6 was the final score. It was a pretty dominant performance, especially from the Lions defense. And it, of course, brings up some issues that the Falcons need to fix as they move towards a week 4 matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars in London and on throughout the regular season. We're going to dive into all that. We're going to break down this game and really nail down exactly what went wrong against the Lions and what kind of needs to get fixed as the Falcons move forward, in addition to identifying some trends that are both right and wrong with this unit as it currently stands. The Jacksonville Jaguars lost by 20 points to the Texans today, believe it or not, but they are no slouch. They will pose a tough opponent, especially playing in London, where they have a pretty large fan base, considering they play there at least once a year. They're actually going to be there for 2 consecutive games, starting with the Falcons clash in week 4. I feel like I've been talking for a really long time now. Tori, give me some takeaways. What went wrong and why?
Oh gosh. Well, first off, if we just want to talk about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce for this entire podcast, I'm okay with that. We just won't even talk about what happened in Detroit. No, I'm kidding. So I essentially post-game wrote about this whole idea of complementary football. And this is something that has come up with the Falcons, not just this year, but over the course of, I would say, even the last couple of years, of trying to find ways to play complementary football where every single unit is playing at optimal level. Well, on Sunday, I didn't ever feel like there was any type of complementary football happening over the course of 4 quarters. I mean, I think back to the third quarter in particular, when the defense had 4 really key stops. And at the time it was 13-3. And I felt like the defense kept coming up with stops and kept giving the ball back to the offense to do something, to do anything. And every single time they did, I mean, they never even got into the red zone until I think 5 minutes and 30 seconds left to go in the fourth quarter. And that's just really hard to do and to keep up with once you're playing through all 4 quarters if your offense is not moving the ball. And you do have to give credit where credit is due with Detroit, but at the exact same time, I wonder what it would have looked like if all of Detroit's defensive starters were there, because this was a depleted defense for Detroit that really kind of enacted its will against this Falcons offense and kind of did what it wanted to. I mean, there was hardly anything that was working for the Falcons offensively. And I think that it was a really, really frustrating game to watch. And I think it was also just from talking to guys in the locker room, there were obvious frustrations with the fact that they weren't able to do what they have been able to do now for almost a year and a half, which is run the ball. The Lions took that away. And it's just, it was, I think, disheartening and frustrating. Those are the words that I think like kept coming up when you're kind of talking about this, but it's like to go from a 20-6 loss to now you're turning around and going to London. I mean, this is a big swing for the Falcons. I know we're going to talk about that later, but just thinking about what the next 2 weeks could look like this game, if they don't bite it in the bud right now this week, it could carry over into next week and even the week after next.
Terrin, let's dive a little bit deeper into the Falcons' offensive struggles. We talked to right guard Chris Lindstrom after the game, quarterback Desmond Ridder, about kind of why they couldn't find a rhythm in the offensive part of the game, especially in the passing game. What did they tell you?
Well, when it came to the why behind why they couldn't find a rhythm, they kept saying they haven't seen the film yet. They'll go back to that. But what was interesting was when bringing up the 7 sacks, everyone kind of took the blame themselves. Desmond Ridder blamed himself. The offensive line blamed itself. Even like the wide receiver of Drake London was over here saying it's not anyone's fault. Like everyone's got to do their own job. So it's kind of everyone taking responsibility, which I think is a good thing. But at the same time, that means the entire offense needs to fix a little bit. And going off of like what Tori was saying, how the offense never really found its rhythm or identity in general. I was looking at the Lions transcript. Obviously, we weren't in their locker room, but defensive lineman Aiden Hutchinson, who had 2 sacks of his own, was quoted saying about the Falcons, I thought they were going to get back to it as in the run game, and they didn't. So I don't know. I thought we did a good job of stopping the runs that we got, but it was not the game I expected it to be. And I think that can be said by all of us, not just Mr. Hutchinson over here in the other locker room, but they didn't run it. They had 44 yards rushing. That is, it's back to being skewed rather than a balanced offensive attack.
Yeah, and when you look at their rushing production, especially, I can think back to so many games. I know each year is different, but there have been instances, even in the first 2 weeks, where passing game's not clicking. What's Arthur going to do? He's going to run like 7 straight times with Algier and Robinson and get the offense back on track. Or if the passing game isn't really working, they can rely on the run to get going. The one thing that I did notice was that rushing to the outside was tough sledding. I'm going to give Brian Branch a lot of kudos. He was everywhere today. I thought the defensive interior was good, but with Robinson getting to the edge or Tyler Algier being able to work his way into the second level, we just didn't see that very much. When you look at a Falcons offense, which, say what you want about the pass protection, especially against the Lions, but they are a consistently good run blocking line, and they have 2 very talented backs. And you look at it in 2.2 yards per carry, it does put you behind. I just saw consistently when they were trying to work the ball horizontally, either by passing or by getting to the edge first and turning the ball upfield, that was denied time and time again. And it really put pressure on the passing game, and maybe, I don't know, exposed is a bad term, but it really kind of forced the passing game to beat you, and that didn't happen. And that wasn't, I mean, if you look at the completion percentage at 55%, yards per attempt 5.3, Jared Goff at 7.4, it was as much as 10 in the second quarter before the Falcons pass rush really got going. So yeah, there wasn't much that was going right, but normally when things don't go right, you can fall back on the ground game. That wasn't the case today.
I was doing some research for my sidebar, well, more so for Falcons takeoff, because in the moment the sidebar was just scrambling to get done, but per usual post game. But 7 sacks was a single game high through week 2. I don't know if this is a silver lining, but Sam Howell of the Commanders today was sacked 9 times by the Buffalo Bills.
That seems like a lot.
That's a high.
Yeah, and I still think 7 is a ton. 2 came back to back. Overall, though, when you have a performance like this, there's a natural question from the media, like, do you still have confidence in Desmond Ridder? Arthur Smith said, yeah, it's still very high. He still keeps us in games. Is it? I don't know. This may be a weird question, but how do we evaluate Desmond? Obviously, we need to see the tape, and all 3 of us just got done traveling or getting back to a hotel, so we haven't gone over any tape either. But initial impressions of how you evaluate Desmond Ridder, with the having to add in that pass protection wasn't always great, adding in that he didn't have a run game or maybe a good play action passing game to fall back on. How do you look at this in terms of how number 4 operated over the course of this one?
I think that you can't just put this on Desmond Ridder's shoulders. I don't think that, I think this was a failure of the entire offense.
Yeah.
I don't think this is just on Des, and are there plays that Desmond Ridder would want back? Absolutely. He missed a wide open Kyle Pitts that was, if it wasn't gonna score a touchdown, we definitely know it would have flipped the field. There were a couple misses that he had, but I think I even go back to what Arthur Smith was saying after the game when he was asked about the 7 sacks, and he even made a comment where he was like, there were times where we couldn't even get the play set up because Desmond was already under pressure. That's a problem in pass protection. Not being able to run the ball. Like there's a lot of factors that go into not being able to run the ball and not having that to supplement what Desmond Ridder could do in the pass game. When you can't run the ball, it just makes everything so much harder on your quarterback because those rushing lanes are just bogged up. So now you're having to go to the pass, and it wasn't working for them. And he was under a lot of pressure. And so to answer your question, in terms of like evaluating Desmond Ridder, I think it would be unfair to put this entire loss on him and to completely rethink what the Falcons have in him. I think that this is still, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because I do think he is still young, and I do think that he is still learning. Even when we were in the locker room, I was talking to Bijan Robinson, and he even made the comment that, we're still all learning how to play with each other. And I think that goes to Desmond Ridder too. And so I think like you have to take this, and this is also something that Bijan was talking about. He was like, you take this for what it was and you make sure that it's not a setback. And I think like that's how Desmond Ridder has to look at this, and also the people evaluating Desmond Ridder. It's like, where does he go from here? Is this a moment that becomes a setback for him, or is this something that he can turn a page and this offense can click better than they have in the first 3 games? Because like what he said post game, the Falcons have not put 4 full quarters of team play together, and that's offensively, defensively, and special teams. We have not seen, I think, a quote unquote complete game where the mistakes of one unit are not just completely outweighing the other, if that makes sense.
I think a big thing too is you didn't see Desmond Ridder get all that flustered, which was something everyone I talked to in the locker room, and I'm sure Bijan Robinson said to you, Tori, at least noted. Like Drake London said, when he got up, we should be getting up. It shouldn't be just Desmond putting the team on his back. Like it's a full team effort, and like you said, it wasn't all clicking together. So that's really what needs to be figured out. But I don't think it's too soon to decide whether or not Desmond is in the wrong or right in general. I mean, people forget that this is only game 7 for him in his career. I don't know why he seems so much older, so much more experienced, but maybe I'm just getting old. Sorry, Scott. But I don't know. Desmond Ridder seems older than just 7 games into his career.
Yeah, I mean, and there's the NFL is a weird, the whole like week to week matchups league. That's true. I mean, I'm just standing here looking at the NFL scoreboard. The Jags lost to the Texans by 20. The Cowboys, which are on top of the world, lost to Arizona by 12. Chicago, I'm not sure if they were ever in Kansas City today, even though the scoreline says that there was. and the Dolphins scored 7-0. So strange things happen. And so you have to look at it, right, as kind of like a week-to-week situation. And look, the score wasn't good. We're not trying to, mine gold in a sewer here.
Yeah, we're not trying to make excuses either.
No,
Yeah.
100%. And the reason why I say that is that when you look at what this defense was able to do, right,
Yeah.
They allow 29% of their third down conversions, or I phrase that weird. The Lions converted 4 of 14 times on third down. They were 1 for 4 in the red zone. They got a takeaway. They averaged less than 4 yards per rushing attempt,
which is better than what it's been the first 2 games.
Right. And it was a defensive performance that set up the possibility of victory. I think that's fair to say. There was an explosive early in the game, I believe a 45-yard touchdown, which looked like, I mean, I'm not a football expert, but that looked like a busted coverage to me. No one should be that open. But outside of that, I thought that they were pretty solid. Now, this isn't saying that they were perfect. This isn't saying it's all on the offense. But I think that when you look at those numbers and what the Falcons were able to do, I think those things are positives, right? But I think you saw that when Jared Goff was flustered, things didn't go all that well for him.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
you look at what he was able to do in the first half. I believe he had 188 passing yards, and was averaging, I think at halftime, was averaging 9 yards of completion, which is pretty significant, especially when you put that with 188 passing yards. But you did see this defense come out of halftime and have a better game plan that was working. And I think it just goes to show how much this defense, I feel like week in and week out, we have seen them kind of have a misstep early, but then they turn it on in the second half. You saw it against Carolina. I think you also saw it against Green Bay, and they show up in the moments when it matters most. They may have a mess up here or there, like what we're talking about, the potential busted coverage with that 45-yard touchdown pass, but they rectified it. And I think by the end of the game, no, they didn't sack Jared Goff, which you would love for them to have, 4 sacks or something like close to that. But they
at least one.
Mm-hmm. They didn't have any, but they did. And that was something that Arthur Smith said. He was like, we were getting to him. We were applying more pressure. And I think by the end of the game, they actually ended up having 9 or 10 quarterback hits. And I do think a majority of them came in the second half. So you saw them make adjustments. You saw them be better coming out of halftime. And they did. I mean, they gave this offense chance after chance to go put points on the board. And I'm not saying that we're not saying that this loss is solely on the offense or anything like that. But you just got to take it for what it was. And I do think that the defense gave them a chance.
Hello, Jesse Bates again. He said, hold my water bottle. I'm going to handle this.
Yeah.
With another interception, his third in as many games.
It kind of blows my mind as I'm looking at the final individual stats. The Lions completed passes to only 4 guys, and Jahmyr Gibbs only had 1 catch. So a lot of this was done by St. Brown and Iowa rookie tight end Sam Laporta, who was big in the first half, especially with just a bunch of receptions. So
Laporta had that big 45-yarder, so that's where most of his yards come from anyways.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think when you're looking at this defense, look, they're going to tell you that they need to take the ball away more than once and that they need to be more consistent. And I agree with that. But overall, when you look at what the issues kind of are, and I was trying to look at from a 3-week perspective, the inconsistency kind of on both sides of the ball. Tori, I believe, had mentioned that they have kind of like a gaffe or a slip up early, and that seems to be the case. And they do seem to lock down. I think the Falcons have generally been pretty good towards the end of half and obviously at the end of games. Even offensively. And I think that those things are good, but it goes back to that trying to put 4 quarters together. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to give up a touchdown. It doesn't mean that you're not going to go 3 and out on offense. It just means that you can't have these prolonged lulls where you're going 3 and out a significant amount of time. And of course, you can say, all right, well, the Jags just lost to Houston, but I still got Trevor Lawrence and old friend Calvin Ridley and a bunch of offensive weapons, and they can play well on defense. And this is another team that doesn't want to lose 2 in a row, just like the Falcons don't. So I think when you look at what kind of needs to get fixed, and that's maybe too general of a term, but I think that they need to make accelerated progress in the passing game. They don't have a lot of time to do it. They get back on an airplane Thursday night to go to London. So anybody have?
I think too.
Yeah, go ahead.
What I was going to say too, just to add to that, is that I've said this, I think on the podcast before, but a complete game does not equal a perfect game. There's no such thing as a perfect game, but there is such thing as a complete game, in my opinion. And the Falcons need to be more complete. And I think if they are, I think something that we've talked about, it's something that's been a theme over the first 3 weeks of the season. And having slip-ups and having moments where things kind of are off kilter, your offense isn't in a rhythm, your defense is giving up maybe some more explosive plays or some defensive pass interferences like what we saw against Green Bay. Even when those things were happening against Carolina and against Green Bay, they were able to counteract that when they did start chugging along and playing better. Against Detroit kind of took advantage of the Falcons in the moments where they were not firing on all cylinders and weren't able to get things going. They never got to the point where they turned a corner like what we saw against Carolina and Green Bay. And so I think like you want to, if the Falcons are going to have a slow start in London, it needs to look more like Carolina and Green Bay, where there was an obvious shift and a corner turned where things started clicking. There was never a point on Sunday against Detroit where I felt like things were clicking, especially for this offense.
I'm just looking at this possession chart, and the Falcons started beyond their own 25 twice. Once they started at their own 35, which isn't a whole lot better. And then on the next drive, Jesse Bates interception set them up in Lions territory. That's it. The Lions started beyond the 25 5 times. So when your offense is kind of struggling, and you think about the weapons that the Falcons have, and look, like Bradley Pinion can't punt it 75 yards, but special teams the offense didn't get in a rhythm to give Pinion a chance to truly flip the field. We saw Younghoe Koo miss a field goal, which is odd. Now, we're not blaming that on losses. The reason why I'm bringing up special teams here, and I'm sure that Marquise Williams would say the same thing, is that this is a 3-phase issue. And all 3 phases definitely have to be better moving forward. But just being able to sustain drives and things like that, basics, which goes back to running the football. And if there's one thing I'm certain of after watching the Falcons for 3 weeks, is that their lack of rushing production. I'm willing to go ahead and reach out on a not so bold prediction and say that the rushing production against the Lions was an aberration compared to what they're going to be able to do over a longer term, but that does need to get right pretty quickly.
I feel like we just went full circle with the special teams and offense after talking about defense, back to complementary football.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I mean, like, that's really going back to Tori's headline. I mean, like, that's what was missing today, is that, and it's proof that you can't live and die by one unit, by just running the ball well, or just stopping the run, or just playing great defense. And it's going to take more than that, especially when you start leveling up and playing a team like the Lions that was banged up, as Tori pointed out, but is still pretty good, and was really pissed that they lost to the Seahawks last week. And I think Falcons aren't going to be happy. I think the Jags aren't going to be happy with their result before they head across the pond. And I think that's going to set up what should be a pretty interesting matchup in London in week 4, and a key one. I'm sure both of those teams want to end up with coming home. Well, I guess the Jags don't come home, but the Falcons definitely want a victory to push themselves up to 3-1. And frankly, if you get to 3-1 after the first 4 games, I think you're having some extra ice cream for dessert, no doubt. And I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this edition of the Falcons Final Whistle podcast presented by Zaxby's. Thank you guys so much for joining in, for rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the Atlanta Falcons podcast network. For Tori and Terrin, I'm Scott. We will talk to you again on video, not directly after the London game, because that would be insane, but actually in the coming days afterward, where we're going to take a more bigger picture look at how the Falcons have done over the course of 4 games. We will see you then.